the Monolith. For the longest of times, it was the only vehicle we Necron players could take, and now I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your Monolith in 8th edition 40k. Welcome back, great to have you here. If this is your first time here, here's what's up. If you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then be sure to smash the subscribe button below and ding the bell. That way, you won't miss anything. Now let's talk about some tactics to get the most out of the Monolith War Machine. Okay, so the Monolith. It's almost doubled in points this edition, so the big question is it still worth taking? And the answer is maybe. So let's just quickly go over some of the stats. Trying to keep this nice and quick for you because you probably already know what the stats are. But it moves 6 inches when it's at full wounds. It's got a weapon skill of 6+, because, you know, trying to land on stuff's difficult apparently. It's got a ballistic skill of 3+, because it's been FAQ'd, which is pretty decent. It's got a strength of 8, so if you do hit someone in close combat, you're going to crush them most likely. It's got a toughness of 8, so it's reasonably durable. It's got 20 wounds. I remember when things started getting more and more wounds back a couple of editions ago, and we had a joke going around. It's like, what, it's got 20 wounds? Well, yes. Yes, it does. It gets 3 attacks in close combat, leadership 10 like all Necrons, and it's got a 3+ save, so it's reasonably durable. Provided you don't find yourself against an army of las cannons. But if you're finding yourself against an army of las cannons taking vehicles, any vehicle's probably not a great idea. It has 4 Gauss flux arcs and a particle whip, both 24-inch range, both heavy weapons. Your flux arcs are getting 3 shots apiece, so you get 12 shots with them, that's pretty decent. You get 6 shots with your particle whip. Your flux arc's strength 5, your particle whip's strength 8, so the particle whip, it's still reasonably decent. I mean, you're still wounding on a 4+ against land raiders and the like, so it's not great for taking down that sort of thing, but taking down basic infantry, you're wounding them on a 2+, so it's plenty for that. AP -2, so by Necron standards, but as far as 40k as a whole goes at the moment, a -2 AP is fairly reasonable. And then your flux arcs are doing 1 damage and your particle whip's doing D3. The particle whip, personally, I think it's more for taking down heavy infantry than vehicles. The Monolith is not the vehicle killer that it used to be when it was ripping stuff apart really quickly. So it can also deep strike 12 inches away from your opponent. So if you're just using it as a weapons platform, then that's plenty close enough. Now, the Portal of Exile has made a return. If stuff that's not a monster or vehicle charges your Monolith, you roll a d6, compare it to the chart, and they might suffer some mortal wounds. So when it comes to people who are more close combat army oriented but don't have huge numbers, so say you're fighting against Grey Knights is a great example, low numbers and they're pretty damn good in close combat, it makes them think twice about charging because there is a reasonable chance that they're going to be taking mortal wounds and losing quite a few guys. In the index, it says that it's supposed to have a base, but I don't see any base on this. Do you see a base on this? I don't see a base on it. It's weird that they included that there. It also doesn't suffer penalties for moving and firing heavy weapons, which is good because all of its weapons are heavy. If it suffered penalties for firing them, it would just be shocking. So it's good that it doesn't have to worry about that. It also has a similar rule to what the Night Sights have, in that it can bring in reinforcements off of the Tomb World, which is pretty damn good, especially once we get into the tactic we're going to talk about shortly. You do need to be careful though, because if the Monolith goes down and you don't have any other Monoliths or Night Sights, then whatever's on your Tomb World is destroyed. So if you're going to use that, which I recommend you do, it's a fairly reasonable way to get your troops close to the enemy, you need to make sure that you're getting them out turn 1, turn 2 at the absolute latest. And it also explodes if it goes down, which is absolutely okay, because generally by the time it goes down you probably shouldn't have that much stuff around it, and if you're lucky you might take down some of your enemy. It's just something that you need to keep in mind. Okay, so with that BS out of the way, let's talk about the strategy that we're going to use to get the most out of the monolith. So, as a lot of people have already discussed, a really effective way to use the monolith is to bring out the Deceiver and have him relocate the monolith so that it is directly in front of your opponent turn 1. Now, if your opponent has a lot of las cannons and vehicle destroying weaponry, I would think twice about doing this. And my reason behind this is that if your opponent gets first turn, bye bye monolith, because even at 20 wounds, 5 or 6 melters or las cannons, there's a reasonable chance that it's going to go down. So when you're choosing your tactic, it's a good idea to always look at what your opponent has bought. And the monolith, 9 times out of 10, I would recommend deep striking it now, because you don't have to worry about deep strike mishap anymore, which for some reason I would always suffer mishap badly, and I'd always end up having tragic accident or whatever it was and losing my monolith. It just seemed to be what would happen to me. It was absolutely annoying. If your opponent doesn't have lots of tank destroying stuff, use the Deceiver to relocate the monolith to be right in front of them, and then you can bring out an infantry unit from it turn 1. Now, something you need to keep in mind, something I was considering while I was coming up with the idea for this video, is that destroyers and heavy destroyers are infantry. So if you're playing on a fairly large table, you could use this to put the destroyers immediately in front of your enemy, and then they've got a lot of wounds and a lot of firepower to deal with. Now, this tactic does of course come with a price, because destroyers are not fantastic in close combat, and you have just put them right in front of your opponent. So make sure that you're careful about your positioning, because you do not want them getting charged. They will be in trouble if they get charged. So would I recommend bringing the destroyers out of it? In most cases, no, not great. You could bring immortals or warriors through it, a squad of 20 warriors popping up right in front of your enemy and rapid firing. Fairly lethal. But the real advantage of getting the monolith this close is, of course, close combat units like flayed ones or Lich Guard. Praetorians, not so much, because they are fairly quick to start with. So most of the time, I wouldn't recommend using the Praetorians. You can, but it doesn't really take that much advantage, because they are as quick as they are. They can get up the field on their own. But even flayed ones are good to bring out of the monolith, because even though they can deep strike with their particular deep strike rule, they have to be more than 9 inches away from any opponent, which of course presents difficulties, because good luck rolling a 9 or higher on 2d6 reliably. Bringing them out of the monolith and then moving them there 5 inches, you're closing the gap, and then they only need to get 6 or 7 inches to make it into close combat, which is a much more achievable thing to do. Of course, if you don't have the points to take a monolith and a Deceiver and whatever you want to bring out of them, because that is quite a few points to deal with, you can of course deep strike it, but it does mean you're going to be 12 inches away from your opponent. But it does of course mean that it needs to stay there for an entire turn before you're going to be able to bring anything through the portal, which of course presents the opportunity for your opponent to destroy it, so just be cautious of that when you're deciding where you place it. It might be worthwhile for the turn that you do deep strike the monolith to bring in some other vehicle, like say a Ghost Ark or a Triarch Stalker, and just ram it down your opponent's throat. That way they're more likely to perceive that as the immediate threat and ignore the monolith a bit, and not fire quite as many of their las cannons or other heavy vehicle destroying weapons into your monolith. That way you can get it to your next turn and bring through your Lich Guard or flayed ones or whatever you want to bring through. Now, in previous editions, the Gauss Flux Arcs were kind of underwhelming because they could only fire in their firing arc, but now that that's gone, you can fire them all at the same target, which makes them a lot more lethal because you've got 12 shots at strength 5 AP minus 2. This is devastating to Space Marine tactical squads, because you're going to hit with 7 or 8 of them, and then because it's strength 5, you're going to be wounding with about 5 or 6 of them, and then you're making them take a 5-up save, so you're likely to get 3 or 4 wounds through, and then because you've wiped out nearly half the squad, they're likely to fail morale and take a few more casualties, which makes it very lethal, especially when you partner it with the part of which is wounding on 2s and getting 6 shots. So it's very, very lethal at taking down both standard infantry and heavy infantry. Something else to keep in mind, and a tactic that I really like using with the Monolith, because it is such a large model and it's a very, very tempting target for opponents. It's hard for an opponent to ignore. So you can use it as a very expensive distraction as well. You take your Monolith and you put it into reserve, into Deep Strike Reserve, whatever it's called. And basically the tactic is that you take the Monolith and you drop it right down your opponent's throat, forcing them to divert their forces away from where you are. It can be a very good tactic for pulling an opponent away from an objective or pulling them into a trap, because the Monolith is such a tempting target to go for. So, just to quickly summarize, the Monolith, it can take quite a bit of damage, but you do need to be careful about where you place it, because your opponent's going to have a hard time resisting blasting the crap out of it. Combining it with the Deceiver in higher points games is a very effective way to make it so that you can get your close combat or slow moving infantry into range of your opponent turn 1. And if you want to take a fairly big risk, you can always take 2 or 3 Monoliths and a Deceiver and put all of them straight down your opponent's throat, and then just bring warriors or immortals out of them and have your entire army right in your opponent's face turn 1. It is a great spin because Necrons traditionally are quite slow, so your opponent is not... most opponents, when they hear they're facing Necrons, are not going to expect to have a ridiculous number of warriors and a couple of Monoliths right in front of them turn 1. It is absolutely hilarious and somewhat mean as well. So I mean, you should definitely not do that tactic. The Monolith is also a fairly capable weapons platform, but for the points, purely as a weapons platform, it is not worth it. Its real glory shines in its ability to get stuff in front of your opponent very early in the game. It is also a brilliant distraction because it is so big and it is so many points invested in the Monolith. It is a great distraction to pull your opponent around, because you can use it to distract a good chunk of your opponent's army while you set up a trap and outflank them. So there you go. There's some of the tactics that I use with my Monolith to get the most out of it. And like I said, it's still quite an effective tank to take on the battlefield. Sure, it's gone up in points, but it is very good for both employing technology as well as getting your troops up nice and close to your opponent and ramming them right down their throat. The Monolith's main strength is in aggressive tactics. I do not recommend using it defensively. It's not a great idea. Its strength is in aggression. If you're looking for something defensive, go for a Doomsday Arc. It's much more effective at being defensive than the Monolith. The Monolith is good at ramming stuff straight down your opponent's throat by running it through its portal, as well as the fact that it's a really good distraction tool to use against opponents. So as always, if you like this video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up so that we know that you like it, so we can keep making stuff that you like. And if you have any ideas for anything wargaming related that you'd like us to cover, then just chuck it in the comment section below and we'll get to it. And as always, if you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then just smash the crosshair and ding the bell. You'll subscribe and I'll be able to share with you more battle reports, terrain tutorials, and strategies to make your wargaming experience more epic. And I'll see you next time.